Welcome. So let's begin today with just a few minutes, just in silence. And let that be an open, sincere inquiry for you, just to explore what that really is. So now here's sound. And does this sound diminish the silence that you've been inquiring into? So let's accept the invitation to continue to inquire into this silence, at least for the next hour, and why not for forever, but at least for the next hour. So this is the secret, really. You know, I think it was last week in the Q&A, somebody asked about, what's really going on here and what am I doing? That's it. That's the secret. It's the silence. So this silence, now that's just a word. And I'm going to clarify it so that we can hopefully take the unnecessary baggage off of the meaning that you associate with that word so that we can get crystal clear on what's being pointed to. So the silence that I'm referring to, silence that I'm inviting you to notice, is not strictly an absence of sound or activity. So often we think that. And so when we hear this invitation to notice the silence, then what we notice is all of the noise, the activity, the loud mind, the narrative that's going, the discomfort, the sensations, and so forth. And so when I'm using this word in this way, saying silence, I'm not referring to the kind of silence that can be disturbed by a sound or by activity. It's what is here that's the foundation of all of the sound and all of the activity. So another way to notice that is right now, you notice this sound that you probably think of as the sound of my voice. So notice that you can be curious about this sound. For example, where does it come from? Now, I'm not talking about the so-called science of it, where you try to understand how the sound is generated by some vibration of some part of the body and some resonance, and how that is distributed through air and so forth, and how it's received by through the ears and the nervous system. What I'm talking about is just in the direct experience right now, just like a child could be curious. Doesn't require sophisticated intellect. You just notice in a very simple way right now. Where does the sound come from? And if you are looking to the mind, you're thinking about it. But do you actually believe that the sound comes from thought? Is that the origin of sound? And obviously not. So then don't look to the mind, because the mind is just a collection of thoughts. So all you're going to find there are thoughts. You won't find the origin of sound. So as I said, it's available to a child. A child can do this inquiry because it doesn't require any knowledge of the kind that we're all accustomed to. It's not something that you have to have some sophisticated model or understanding of. It's just obvious, actually. So you notice you have to listen. I laugh just because it's obvious, but we don't notice it. So you have to listen. So just listen and notice this sound that we can all agree is the sound of my voice. This sound, it seems to come and go. So you can just listen and then be really curious. Where is this sound coming from? And if you keep looking to the mind, all you'll get are thoughts. I pointed out just because that's what we do. So you'll notice you just keep going back to the mind. Yeah, what is that? And you're thinking about it and you're generating models, drawing on all that dead knowledge. But here we're talking about living knowledge. So living knowledge is life itself. So you have to pay attention. And as I say, again, it's available. This inquiry is accessible to a child. So if you're doing anything or looking to anything that's above the capacity of a 3-year-old, then you're overcomplicating it. So you can just then dismiss it right out of hand as soon as you notice that you're doing it. So again, just listen and just notice what's plainly obvious, which is that this sound is coming and going. So you notice I say something, and then there's a pause. Then I say something again. So there's sound coming and going, but where is it coming from? You just listen, observe, and it's plainly obvious. So notice what's here when the sound of my voice is not here. And if you're looking to the mind to understand that, then don't do that. It's my habit too. So I'm laughing. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you, or I'm laughing at myself. So just see how you can just let your attention rest so gently, like a cat outside of a mouse hole. And if you don't know how a cat is, then I'll explain it to you. A cat will seem as though it's fallen asleep, but it's watchful. It's always watchful. It's ready. So it's very restful. So not giving rise to any thoughts, not attending to any thoughts, but just watching. Watching to notice what is actually here. So you notice there's something here that is you can't put your finger on it, what it is, but it's here. You can be aware of it. And then the sound appears. It's quite odd. But just watch. So between the sound, there's something. But it's not sound. We wouldn't say it's sound. I mean, maybe there's some other sound, but we're just talking about the sound of my voice. So when the sound of my voice is not here, then we can say safely that the sound of my voice is not here. But there's something here. But it's not the sound of my voice. And we're not talking about other sounds. We're talking about something that you can't name. So if you can name it, of course, there are things, particles of dust and, whatever. But we're not talking about those. We're talking about what's here between all of those. So the sound of my voice is just to bring it to bring a focus to just one thing, but we could generalize this to everything. So everything is coming and going. It appears and disappears. It rises and falls. So the invitation is just to bring focus to the sound of my voice and just notice the appearing, so to speak, and disappearing of that sound. Now, can you pay attention? So this happens obviously many times. Every time there's any pause, big or small, there's the disappearance of sound and then the reappearance of sound. Well, how about this? Now, where does the sound go? And if, just as a reminder, if you're turning to your mind for an answer, don't bother there, because you come up with all kinds of things. You say, well, sound continues forever out in, some form, because energy is not created, it's just transformed. But that's something that was learned in a physics class. So what would a 3-year-old child, how would a 3-year-old child approach it? They would be so innocent. And that's what I'm inviting you to, is you just notice your actual experience, independent of all the collection of ideas, just to notice, what is it that you actually can observe? Where does the sound go? And another trick that you might find happening is that you think this is not the mind, but it is the mind, and it will say, well, I don't know. Yeah, the mind doesn't know, but don't, I'm telling you, don't look there. So if you don't settle for any answer, but instead you directly observe, then something happens, or something becomes seen or noticed. Now you can notice that the sound is coming and going. So it comes from this, now I'm going to use the same word I used earlier, silence. So I'm going to use a word, but again, there's no word that accurately can describe this, but it's this presence that is here when there's a pause. So the sound is happening and then there's a pause. There's something, and I'm calling that silence. So notice, isn't it plainly obvious that the sound comes out of the silence and it returns to the silence? Isn't that just obvious? Not to the mind. The mind says, well, hold on a second, let me think about it. But to the 3-year-old child, isn't it plainly obvious? There's a silence and then there's sound, and then there's silence. Now, find out if you can find the exact point at which the sound appears and the exact point at which the sound disappears. So there's silence, and then there's a sound, and then that sound goes away. I mean, at least this is what we think. But can you find the point at which the sound appears and the point at which the sound disappears? You have to be like that cat watching outside the mouse hole. Very restful, but very watchful. So if you're all uptight, you're just going to be stuck in the mind, trying to figure it out in the wrong way. But if you relax, like you haven't got a care in the world, but you're just watching just to see out of curiosity, maybe even because it's your nature just to watch, like it's the cat's nature to watch, then you start to observe, can you, in this way, in this very relaxed, watchful way, can you pinpoint the exact moment at which the sound appears and the exact moment at which the sound disappears? Mind is not going to be on board with this, so don't bother going there. The mind will doubt and analyze and compare and continue to seek the answer, but you can just directly observe, and don't try to draw a conclusion. There we go. See, that's the business of the mind. That's so that you can package it up and file it away so you have some dead knowledge. But here we're talking about living knowledge. Why do you need to draw a conclusion? That's for the mind. It's not for you. So it's fine that the mind does that, but we're not saying that the mind can't do that. The mind keeps doing that, but you can just remain restfully watchful. And why not just remain restfully watchful? So there's no need for you to draw a conclusion regarding, have I found it or have I not found it? That's not actually the point. The point is simply to observe and to notice that the more that you observe, the more is revealed. And the more that's revealed, the more that it points with crystal clarity to this, which I'm calling silence. So notice now that if you don't draw the conclusion that this sound is begun and the sound is ended, then, and you're just watching, just keep watching, just relax. And if you say, well, I'm not very relaxed, that's okay. You see, you're relaxed. Maybe the mind isn't relaxed. Maybe the body isn't relaxed. But what I'm referring to here is the that of you, which is already, its actual nature is simply to be this restful watching. So it can't be other than that. You can't be other than that. So notice now, as you're just restfully watching, that this, what we're calling silence and what we're calling sound, both of them exist as a undifferentiated whole, with a W, not starting with an H, WHOLE, completeness. uh, as you. So you just notice, you're observing with this intention. Can I notice where the sound, so you have to listen, you notice the pause, you notice when the sound begins, then the pause, and see, can you pinpoint exactly where the sound begins and where the sound ends, or where the sound appears and where it disappears? And if you're not drawing a conclusion, if you're not saying, aha, I've got it, then notice in this, simply in this open, restful watching. I'm not talking about in the mind. This isn't denial of any of the objective phenomena of this world, but rather just to observe in our direct experience. Notice that prior to the drawing of a conclusion prematurely, as long as you just remain restfully watchful, then both the silence and the sound are undifferentiated. There is no beginning or end. And both of them exist as this undifferentiated singularity, as you, as this watchfulness. So this is interesting, maybe. Now, let's look at we always want to know this, so it's important. We want to know, okay, great, fine. But what is the practical value of this for me? It's fine, it's a fair question. What is the practical value of this for me? Well, let's take a look. So, first of all, let's get clear on who is this me who needs the practical value. So who is it that's asking the question? Now, this is not some silly game to try and negate just so you understand, but just to gain clarity. So just take a look. You see, again, you can notice this restful watchfulness, and it's just wide open. So does this restful watchfulness have any sense of needing a practical value for me? Does that notion apply in any way? You just have to look for yourself and see. So hopefully it's clear that it does not apply to restful watchfulness. I mean, restful watchfulness is simply open and aware. It doesn't have any sense of differentiation of me and any need of practical value. It's aware, which is to say you are aware. You are aware of everything, everything. And when I say everything, I don't mean everything in the conceptual world. I mean everything uh, in the actuality of direct experience. So I'm not saying that if you're not presently in a location, that you have all awareness of everything in that location. No, what I'm saying is in your direct experience, you have awareness of everything in your direct experience. And that actually is, if you look in a very innocent way, same way that I've been inviting you to look, just like a child would, you see that's the actual truth. That's the living knowledge. The living knowledge is what is actually here. Dead knowledge is the knowledge of something else. So, okay, so here we find, okay, I am clearly aware. I am this restful watchfulness, and this concern of practical value for me doesn't apply to the truth of who I am here at this level. Okay, but it seems as though it applies somehow, and it would be like cheating to dismiss this question. It would be like sleight of hand. It wouldn't be sincere, because there is this recurring appearance of, we'll call it suffering, or let's call it suffering. Maybe you don't like that word, but we'll just use that word. So this recurrence of this appearance of suffering, and so then that's why this question comes up. And so it's a sincere question because it arises out of a longing for a better way, for a resolution to what we somehow intuitively know is not the best. It's not fulfilling. It's not really the fulfillment of our purpose. We're not here just to struggle and fake it and get by. We're not here to suffer. It's not the purpose of our lives. And we can't deny that these lives keep appearing. This person keeps appearing. So this question is arising here at this level. What is the practical value of all this for me? Well, okay, so now we're a little clearer. So you notice that it's like you have a dual aspects. Now, most of the time, we're conditioned only to notice that aspect that we could call the person, the personality, this character, which is changing in this world, the phenomenal self. And so we identify as that, and that's all we know. And that's understandably why we give so much importance to this question. What's the practical value of all this for me? Because this aspect of ourselves is what it is that we perceive as suffering. It's the aspect of ourselves which seems to be out of whack and needs some help of some kind. Now, this other aspect of ourselves, which we usually don't notice because there's not really the only reason for that I can see is because it's just not widely recognized or given importance. But if it was, it doesn't have to be so difficult or hidden or any of that. It could be very mainstream, actually, because everybody is this. So it's not something that needs to be created. It's not something that needs to be fixed or improved or any, and it's already existent and it's already perfect and complete and whole. It's just, as I said, it's not broadly recognized nor given importance. So, and hence this question, what's the practical value of this for me? Well, hopefully we'll get to that. So here we have these dual aspects of ourself, the phenomenal self, and we could say the consciousness, just to have a word. Okay. And as we've already seen now, actually, well, okay, several important points, and you have to observe this for yourself for it to be of value to you. So notice this phenomenal self is unstable, very unstable, has poor foundation. That this makes it sound bad. I'm not intending to make it sound bad. It's not bad. It's not inherently bad, but we just want to see that on its own, it's unstable, doesn't have a good foundation, and there's a lot of suffering and confusion and struggle and strain. On the other hand, now observe directly this what I'm now calling consciousness, which is this watchful, awareness. So you just notice that it's boundless, it's open, it's unconditioned, limitless. So here there are no problems. It's absolutely stable, unchanging. It's not subject to change. So another distinction is that the phenomenal self is subject to time, But consciousness, you see, is timeless. Time is arising in consciousness. The mind doesn't understand that, but you can just directly observe that. You just have to notice. So now let's see, what is the relationship between these two selves? So the phenomenal self, which is what we usually take ourselves to be. So that's, this person who is engaged in all these activities and has a name and a history and all that. Just observe the phenomenal self and see, is this phenomenal self ever not here? And you have to observe it in the same way that you observe sound. So not by looking to the mind, but by looking as an innocent child. Just if you don't have, see, if you're very innocent, this means that you're very trusting. You're very, you are not attached in the same way to the fearful attachments that are commonplace. So maybe some fear is provoked sometimes in this process because it has to be at least temporarily abandoned in order to really see this innocently. You just have to trust. So just for a moment, just observe directly and see, does this phenomenal self exist continually, or does it appear and disappear? And you might find that the phenomenal self is a lot like the sound. It appears and it disappears, and it's appearing and disappearing in what we'll call silence. It doesn't have, I don't know what to call it. So you can just see that that's true. Even in the course of just a few seconds, you see the phenomenal self is appearing and disappearing. Can't maintain it continuously. And if that's not obvious to you, at the very least, you can, and this is a little bit intellectual, but nonetheless, you can at least acknowledge that in deep sleep, the phenomenal self disappears. Also, in the dream state, the waking dream, the waking phenomenal self disappears. Now, a dream phenomenal self may appear, but the waking phenomenal self is not there. And neither phenomenal selves exist in the deep sleep state. So this phenomenal self is appearing and disappearing. Now notice that this same consciousness in which there's awareness of both the silence and the sound as a singularity is also the foundation in which the silence and there's a dance of silence and the phenomenal self appearing in consciousness. So this phenomenal self is troubled, and the phenomenal self blips out of existence, and there's a profound rest. And here we've been observing it consciously, so there's a recognition, oh yes, I am, even when that phenomenal self is not. Now, I hadn't pointed it out until now, so you might not have noticed it explicitly, but it's been there for you to observe. And so me pointing it out should be a simple thing of just looking and noticing, yes, that's true. And as we've been in this meeting, the phenomenal self has been coming and going, but I have been here continuously. So now, which one is dependent on the other? Is the phenomenal self dependent on consciousness, or is consciousness dependent on the phenomenal self? Clearly, it's not a trick question. Clearly, the phenomenal self is dependent on consciousness, but not the other way around. Consciousness is supreme. Consciousness is here, whether there's a phenomenal self or not. Consciousness is absolutely stable and unchanging. The phenomenal self is unstable and changing. That's not bad. Again, I'm pointing that out because I don't want anybody to make the mistake of falling into this primary duality and now saying, aha, now I'll just seek refuge forever in consciousness, and I'm going to denigrate the phenomenal self and anything having to do with the world or change. That's just delusion and to be rejected. Please don't do that. It's only going to lead to more pain. Because it's not true. It's half true. But half true is not true. So we're getting close now. So so this question still is valid. This question of what is the practical value for me? And now we can use the intellect. Let's use the intellect, but let's also couple it with intuition. So you can just now look and see what the obvious answer is to this question. What's the practical value for me? Well, look here, this phenomenal self who's asking this question, the one who's troubled, the one who has problems, the one who wants help, is receiving that help presently. Please understand, that's what's happening. It's receiving that help in the form of living knowledge, truth, because that's the only thing that can actually offer true help, because anything else is like a half-truth. It won't really satisfy. So what's being revealed directly right now, if you allow it, if you just are receptive and open and curious and just watchful, you see, because you have to see, if you're just watching innocently, that this phenomenal self, which is so troubled, it comes and goes. So what's happening is it's recreated over and over and over and over and over and over, and it does not have the power. How could it? It doesn't have the power to make the change that it so desperately wants, because it doesn't exist independent of change. It is change. It can't get outside of itself in order to have leverage, in order to do something. So anything that this phenomenal self is trying to do is like trying to pull itself up by its own bootstraps. To use one of my favorite expressions, it won't work. Well, that sounds terrible. But wait, this is wonderful news. Now just take one more step and you see. There's all of this is, we're using words. It's like a oversimplification and still creating a kind of false divide to what has no division. So don't cling to any of the words or the ideas that those words generate, because they'll be limited and they won't point you all the way to the truth. The truth is beyond the words, but they're pointing to it. So allow yourself to be pointed to it, and don't cling to the mind, because the mind wants to cling, trying to figure it out. But see, the mind, here's what's being revealed to the mind, and I'll point it out, is the mind is that phenomenal self. They are one and the same. So it also is blipping in and out of existence. Anything that it can, any knowledge it can have is going to be at best of limited value. So here's the best knowledge for the mind. There's something before the mind. That is the source and the answer. You've been doing too much. You're hurting because you're trying to do what is not for you to do. But if you are willing to surrender and simply watch, then there's a truer revelation. So just watch and see that as the mind disappears and reappears and disappears and reappears, that you remain. Now, again, remember, I said, don't get hung up on any technicalities of any ideas that are generated by the words, because they're limited and they're inaccurate. They're just an approximation and a pointing. So see that there's a lot of mystery here. So I'm not able to describe the mystery in any way, to tell the truth. But just notice that there's a mystery here, and that in this mystery, there's so many things. There's desire and intention, and that some of that desire and intention has been, some of that it has to do with the phenomenal self and the mind, but there's some subtle aspect of that which is not of that phenomenal self. And you want to know what that is, and I don't know. But it's also you. And that is, notice what the qualities that has. You can just notice as that we could describe it as the desire, the intention is for unconditional love, unconditional peace, healing, nourishment, harmony. See, all of those words, they point to something that there's just a big yes that's all the way through all of reality. It's just a yes. It's just yes because it's true, because it's describing something of your nature. So now see that there's something here that is a mystery that you are. You can't understand it from the mind, but you can trust it. And that it's intimately one with consciousness, the source, and its intention and desire is a big yes. Now find out what happens if you just surrender. So you want to know what's the practical value for me. Practical value for me is to recognize who you really are. I'm not this thing that's saying what's the practical value for me, which is not to say that the question is not useful. It is, of course, because it's pointing. But we have to look at what it's pointing to. We have to see, oh, who am I? Ah, I am this big mystery. I am this vastness. I am this which is completely constant and trustworthy, whose intention is a big yes, whose intention is absolutely trustworthy. So now, every time there's a doubt, there's a hesitation, there's a question, arising in the phenomenal self, in the mind, there's a possibility of a there's this knowledge, it's dead knowledge, but it's like a bridge. It's the one useful knowledge, which is, what am I supposed to do? Oh yes, look. And you just look, and then it all opens up, and what happens is there's this, and you can maybe feel it right now, there's this nourishment that takes place, that begins to flow throughout, so that we experience the truth of what is pointed to by non-duality. It's not some other thing, it's this present reality, undivided. So now we can look at this in we can actually apply this in a sort of formulaic way, which is this unconditional peace inquiry that I've been exploring with you. So we start by just resting as consciousness, just for a moment. Just drop it all, just watchfully aware, restful. And it doesn't have to be sustained. If it's just a glimpse, just half a second, that's enough. And notice that here it's vast, infinite, unbounded, limitless. And there's no contention, no division, no disharmony. There's no possibility of anything other than unconditional peace here. And that's the truth at the heart of being. So we first recognize that, notice that quality, and then begin to imagine the possibility of unconditional peace expressing in the phenomenal self at the worldly level, in your mind and in your body and in your relationships and in your home and in your community. And you just see in the light of consciousness, not trying to fix it or judge it or anything, but just in awareness, just to see, unmoving, just see, without judgment, just see whatever the objections are. And we have objections. If we didn't have objections, then it would already be manifest at all levels. So the objections are the reason why it's not. And we just want to see them. That's it. That's all we're doing, is just seeing them. So you just see. And what does that mean? Just for clarification, it means you notice that you have beliefs, ideas, memories, judgments, opinions, whatever else may surface that is an objection. It can't manifest. And we're just seeing, it's just like innocent, like a young child. You don't know yet. If you don't have that, you imagine just for a moment that conditioning isn't so strong that you can be before the conditioning for just a moment and just see in this open, innocent way. I don't know what's actually true, but let me just see what's happening. And you just notice it. And then one more time, just drop everything and just rest. Just restful watchfulness, just wide open awareness. No problem, no division. It's only unconditional peace. And then imagine the possibility of this unconditional peace expressing in your body, in your mind, in your relationships, in your home, and in your community. Just imagine. And importantly, there's nothing other than your own objections that can prevent you from imagining that possibility. So here, I'm not saying that you have to have a step-by-step plan of how it's going to be, how it's going to take place. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying you just imagine, the same as you could, right now, you could imagine that you're staring at a cloud in the sky that's shaped like an elephant. You can imagine that. Whether you visualize well or not, you can imagine it. You can have that possibility in mind. That's all. That's all that's needed. You just have that possibility, and then you know in mind, just in your imagination, and then you notice that you tell the truth, which is in my imagination, anything is possible. Anything. You could imagine that you're flying through the sky in your imagination. So you can imagine anything. There's no limitation other than your own conditioning. So all we're doing is imagining that possibility and then seeing the conditioning that interferes with that in imagination. And all we're looking at is seeing the conditioning and seeing it without judgment, just seeing it innocently. And through that, what happens is it begins to dissolve because we see that it's not actually true. It's not to say that those memories might not be true, or that you might not really have those beliefs, but rather it's just that they're not ultimately the absolute truth. They also come and go. So in that, then there starts to be more ease and transparency and more possibility. There's more light in our imagination so that we have more freedom to imagine as we wish, unhindered by the conditioning. So you might notice, especially since we've been doing this for several weeks now, that maybe you can imagine that possibility a little bit more, just a little bit. You don't have to know how that would actually happen step by step in the outside world, but in your imagination, you can hold that possibility. There's more light there. And as we can imagine it, then the possibility of it expressing in the outer world becomes real. If we couldn't imagine it, it couldn't happen. But when we can imagine it, and when many of us can imagine it, well, then what stops us? So thank you for joining me as always. Thank you for your courage and your willingness to be innocent and to really see. And for those who are here live, we can stay on for the Q&A. So let me end this recording.